And it was great because I really had that full-on moment of that, okay, this must go faster, you know. This must go faster in order for this to be all right. And yeah, so it was a very, very useful way to come into the room tonight. Now that we're here for the big grand finale of all-inclusive mindfulness of phenomena. I remember the first time when hearing this come from Doug Vienhoff's mouth about a year ago. It felt, just hearing that phrase, all-inclusive mindfulness of phenomena. Like, what the hell do I have to do with that? Like, that sounds like some type of universe that I never studied in grade school or something like that. And this is, you know, my personal experience with this is that it's life. It's just basically life, how we experience it. And what we've been doing leading up to this point is really, in some ways, well, let's just go back to the first, which was starting with the domain of the body. So really seeing what that experience was like through the 4 elements. Does anyone remember the 4 elements?
Fire, earth, air, water.
Yeah. And what's the experience or sensations associated with those?
Well, air is movement.
Mm-hmm.
Water is actually feeling like liquid.
Mm-hmm.
Moisture.
Mm-hmm.
Earth is solidity,
But that's right.
that is right. That's probably why I didn't want to say it.
Exactly.
And fire is heat and cold.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. So yeah, you know, we had some fun with that. And then we got into the really fun domain of feelings. And, you know, really trying to zero in on how the feelings arise and how they seem to linger and kind of move, and then how they disappear, which was perfect as the setup to getting to the mind, to the domain of the mind. Because very, very similarly, but just looking more specifically at where those mental appearances are arising and abiding and then fading away. So there's that, you know, going through kind of charting that experience of how it's happening and where it's happening. So that all, when you take the body and the feelings and the mental appearances or mental events, I mean, that's fundamentally life. I mean, that's our experience of life. So this really here now, getting into all phenomena, is really focusing on the interrelationship between the 3. Because that's really what it's all about. You know, is really being able to get, you know, whatever seems to be working in a particular moment, such as when I was really looking at this printer and totally making it this self-existent thing that needed to do what I wanted it to do right here and right now. There was how I was thinking about it, there was how I felt about it, you know, and then eventually, thank goodness, was the moment where I was like, and where in the hell is this all coming from anyhow? You know, which is something we'll get into deeper tonight, which is about causality. Because that ends up being what, what can be the wisdom that really can help us in any given moment. In any one of those domains, whether it's something going on with our body, some particular pain, or it's some type of emotional experience, or is this something that we're having difficulty figuring out? As we will have the wonderful examples tonight of some people who show us very clearly how fundamentally we do actually want to know. You know, we do want to know what the hell is going on. But we're also at the same time very willing to accept whatever seems to be the pervasive knowledge about whatever it is, and whether science is dictating that, or whether modern psychology is dictating that, whatever seems to be fairly known in the public, you know, a lot of times we're just happy to like, okay, great, that's how it works, good, done. Done. I don't really have to think about that anymore. But then, how many times does it occur that you're still upset about something that's happening and it just doesn't seem to be adding up? And so it's really helpful when we're able to observe our fellow human beings going through the same situation and recognizing like, okay, well, what is really causing this? You know, how is this really occurring? So it's useful for us to once again really look back a bit on the space of the mind and what we were exploring last week, and the way we were going to define it in this context, in this approach. And it's so good that we kept, I think it was Geneva who had wanted to delve into the second aspect of this. But we were defining the mind as the space or the domain where mental appearances take place. And this is where it was good because I had to go back and look at this to think of a more simple way to articulate this. So it can also be seen as the awareness that observes these appearances. So last week it was a little bit more dense than that. So if you're looking at the space or the domain where these appearances take place, and the awareness that observes these appearances, that's also mind in this approach. And of course, we had the wonderful quote from the Buddha that said, all phenomena are preceded by the mind, consist of the mind, and issue forth from the mind and consist of the mind. So in that particular example of saying phenomena is really using appearances. So for us, that the appearances precede the mind. The understanding we were trying to get at with that was that specifically that the only way that we can understand or have any awareness of what's happening is through our perception of it. Simply that. And so this can be maybe more helpful with an example in terms of, so if I say to you to imagine the smell of a warm chocolate chip cookie. So something's going on. Yeah, just kind of let that, maybe just close your eyes for a moment. Just let that linger. The warm chocolate chip cookie smell. So what can be happening is that the space of your mind is configuring that spell. And it arises from that space. And it consists of that space. And it will dissolve back into that space. So you can open your eyes. So what we were trying to do was basically taking examples like that, was really trying to use the shamatha aspect of, with as much stable, clear, and relaxed attention, be able to then watch these appearances in the space of the mind. You know, to have that kind of focus. And in watching the parade, what's going on, whatever it might be. So that was something that really maybe this is being a little bit optimistic, but to say that we were moving from clear, balanced attention to actually the still point or the stillness of our awareness. Because when we really started getting to asking all those deep questions and so forth, the only way any of this, you know, honestly you can get any traction out of it is with that basis of shamatha, that stability, that clarity, and that deep relaxation. And so what at least I can speak for myself about this in terms of if that was just so happening that I was not able to maintain or sustain that still point of awareness, which was being able to recognize why, what was causing that still point to move. And that was something that we all discussed in terms of the grasping or rejecting whatever the appearance was. So that was where being able to get a sense and detect like, oh, yeah, I'm moving off of my still point. So in those moments where, you know, we recognize the fact that we were attaching to some appearance or trying to kick one out or something like that, that's when we got into the wonderful anecdote of the 4 R's, which is just, man, it just gets better and better. I'm starting to realize now with going through this process of them, in many ways, it's sort of like everything in the teachings of Buddhism. Like, everything you need to know can be within one single system, one single teaching. You know, everything can be there. So when you think of the first one being that you release it, and release whatever it is you're grasping to, or because what's interesting is in the moment that you are rejecting something, to think about the polarity of what is it then that you are trying to attach to, you know, and sometimes that can be for, you know, depending on what it is in your life or in a meditation, that can be something that you consider to be my chosen object. And you're the only one that actually can judge what that is, you know, as to let go of something versus what feels like a rejection of it, because I want this. And this is what I mean about just like in a single step as what is involved in release, what's going on there at a deeper level. And in this particular anecdote, is that so you're releasing what you're considering to be a distraction from what you're choosing to focus on. And unfortunately, in that moment, right after you release it, then that's exactly that moment of clarity is exactly what you're trying to sustain. You know, that is the basis right there. That's the foundation that you're always trying to cultivate and just make more and more a part of your habitual way of dealing with anything, is that, well, I'm clear, I'm lucid about this, and that's the rejoicing. You know, so because sometimes, this morning I'm in meditation, and there's one moment that I'm needing to do that again, rejoice. And I was like, rejoice? What is that? Because I think immediately what came up in that moment was associating a particular type of feeling. And so it was very helpful just to bring to mind to be clear. I'm clear again. I'm no longer off on this thing that I really don't need to be thinking about right now. It's not what I'm choosing to think about or what I want to think about. So yes, so rejoicing. And then is the ones that can continue to shift around, which is to relax, with your exhale, or return to the stillness, the still point of your awareness. And using whatever seems to work in the moment, because that'll keep on shifting.
Using whatever, you mean whatever order seems to work?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And it's also, when you're trying to recall that, or when you're trying to return to that still point of awareness, this is something, Laura, you actually brought up, which is that, when you're using a meditation which has that short, simple phrase that you call to mind at a particular point in the meditation, you can use that to bring you back to your still point. But then there's also, if you're experiencing something such as dullness, some type of, laxity going on, and then that's when you can reinvigorate your attention with the inhale. And then, of course, if you're trying to dispel some distraction, that kind of excitation is where then you can relax with the exhale. So there's kind of, if it's something where you're dealing with those two experiences of it, or if you're in that particular meditation where you can then actually use that phrase to bring you back, which is why sometimes it really is before you, and as we'll do tonight, tonight again we'll be using that device. Sometimes it's nice to put a little bit more thought into what that phrase might be. Simply because if it's not as though you need to be completely aware or bringing to mind what that phrase means in the moment. You're using it in a particular way to bring you back to your still point. But for the most part, you can make the choice as to everything having relevancy, whatever the impressions that you're making upon your mind and your consciousness matter. So in that sense, if it is something that you consider to be maybe more virtuous than, chili pepper, red mango, which is nice. It's certainly succinct and short and memorable and so forth. But it's just another kind of nuance that can matter and add to that. So yeah, it's enough about the mind. I mean, yeah.
It's an interesting on the, I'm talking about getting back to the cookie, the smelling of the cookie. And, things, I'm very, smell is bring back things to me. It's a big memory trigger for me for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so immediately I'm thinking in my mind, smelling the cookie, and then it was just bringing all these really nice thoughts. These things that you want to, even though you're trying to focus on something that you're going empty, going into a focus point, continuing to have these things, I don't want to necessarily release them. Like you said, that the parade starts. Yeah, the parade started. So I'm thinking about, Christmas, holidays and form for family, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, I mean, there's certain times you just be like, I'm just going to enjoy this sitting in space. Maybe I'm just enough. Or maybe this is my meditation for the day.
Well, that's interesting when you say the phrase, enjoy sitting in this space. That seems to be very useful. As in a key distinction, too, between sitting in the space versus sitting in the appearance, sitting in whatever that sensation is. Because that's where, that sensation of what is pleasurable is though you're placing in whatever that appearance is, versus being able to be in that observer mode where you are sitting in the space of awareness. And it's not as though, this is the thing, and this is great that you bring this up because I had questions that were coming after class last week, like back to feelings, back to this about feelings and feelings. And that's the whole thing, is that, as we said last week, that's gonna happen, they're going to keep arising, like, ooh, that feels good. And there it goes. Did you go with it? How long were you with that? It's not as though it's the same way. It's so much kind of gets into deeper and deeper layers of how you're responding to whatever the appearance is. And this is great. So this can just cut like right to the whole end of this. It's just so perfect. It's like when I watch my Lama do this. It gets right to the core of this, which is that how you are responding to those appearances. Everything is in there, because that's just it. It's not about not trying to feel anymore, And I mean, what kind of human life is that's worth living? But as you notice, like, this is the whole thing, is that you're getting more, and with this particular approach of shamatha-vipashyana, is that you're getting more and more adept at when you see whatever it is arise, like, ooh, family, nice. And so there's a relationship, that's been established from all of your previous associations with that is pleasant. But then it's like, as you're being able to see that process, like slowing it down more and more as to like, it's not in the family. If that was the case, wouldn't we be a happy family all the time? It's not in the cookie. And the more and more you start to realize that, yeah, I believe life gets better, actually, because it's getting more realistic. It's also getting more spacious. There seems to, our attachments, with especially what we consider to be pleasurable, so little space in there. It's just like, ooh, I like that. It was so quick, right on it. Same thing with aversion too. Like, no. But very, very different, very, very distinct, I should say, between like, ooh, there it is. There it is, and there it goes. Yeah. Does that answer that at all?
There might be one element that at least occurred to me, because from what I heard, I have that same experience too. Sometimes I'll be meditating on something and it gives rise to something, and then I notice that I'm not doing what I sat down to do anymore. But there's part of me where I don't care. I like doing that thing that it took me away, and I want to continue doing that. And of course, that is a choice. then you're no longer you're kind of no longer doing mind training, you're daydreaming,
Mm.
right? And that's it. I mean, you can
Yeah.
make that choice, but
Yeah.
but if your meditation is to kind of explore the kinds of things that Brian was talking about.
Well, I'm not sure, if this progressing to a 20-minute thing, I doubt that it would be continuing that, but this is a 3-minute, 1-minute, 2-minute exercise.
Right.
We talk about the parade of the crescendo things that occur, and one in the moment of getting there. I think we would probably sort through it and get back on track.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that oftentimes it's like, sometimes it's really, I don't consider it to be a bad way to spend time either.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
a thing, and sometimes, you release the whole, for me, I just have to release the whole moment, go, this is not happening, but
mm-hmm.
I'm really restful and enjoying this,
Mm-hmm.
and where I am right now, and I'll at least be a little better today.
Yeah, yeah, because it's absolutely true. Like, what is your, what was the intention of the moment, right? Exactly. If you're sitting down to like, oh, I'm going to meditate on this, then right, you would set what your chosen object is. And that does that of course makes all the difference. Especially, this type of how we're relating to what's appearing. Be it through the body, be it through our feelings, be it through mental appearances, and when it comes to our lives, the kind of lives that those of us who are human beings in the room are living, Buddhism really is very adept and clear at in a vast, wide compendium of ways breaking down our lives and how we experience them into suffering. Yeah, I mean, we could spend years on talking about all the various systems and teachings on that, but for this particular mode tonight, one we'll focus on is what are known as the 3 types of suffering. Because this is what it's about, right? We need to get clear. This is the Vipassana aspect. What is going on? So, the first type of suffering. Anybody know? Yes. Yes.
I'm trying to. So the subject is the what did you call it? The all-inclusive.
All-inclusive mindfulness of phenomena.
Mindfulness of phenomena. And just, I'm not clear on how, what the connection is to suffering. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
I missed it.
No, I'd be happy to clarify that. Basically, that with the all-inclusive mindfulness of phenomena, which would be being mindful of life as it's occurring, what the experience of life is, which is as experienced through those 3 domains of body, feelings, and the mind. So this 4th domain of all phenomena of life is really about the interrelationship that's happening between those 3 domains, which, like as we can say, we can generalize as saying, all life, our experience of life. And that in this particular aspect of how Buddhism, when you're going to look and examine about what the experience of human life is, that's to look at suffering. And as Lori said, the first one, yes, suffering of suffering. That is blatant, obvious suffering, that's usually very much associated with what happens to the 5 senses, that it can be, sticking your naked hand in fire, and that for most of us that hurts. And that's fairly obvious as it's referred to. And the second is the suffering of change, which most of us are probably clear on that that's the deal in terms of that this experience is changing. You know, I mean, maybe the little babies, I don't know. I can't, those who haven't formed speech yet, I don't know what their take is on it, but as soon as we kind of get a sense of language and articulate it, it's like, yeah. Actually, I think, now that I'm thinking about it, I think they do. I remember Mira was telling me when Elon first started saying ma. So he was articulating what was something specifically his mother, this human being here, and definitely when he wanted something, then ma came out, and you know that's because something has changed. There's some desire that needs to be fulfilled, which for him probably was food, being as little as he is. But yeah, so suffering of change, that's pretty clear for us. Then the third one is where it really starts to get traction in this progression, which is all-pervasive suffering. See, I like that because it has the same kind of esteem as like all-inclusive mindfulness of phenomena. And it really is something that all-pervasive suffering really applies for everything in a human life, primarily because we have all the conditions to be discontent with every situation based on our misunderstanding of reality. You know, that's one way that you can approach it. You know, we've got all the goods to, with any scenario, to experience suffering with it. You know, because there is some fundamental misunderstandings going on with how things are really working. And you know, because the blatant suffering, the obvious suffering, the suffering of suffering, and the suffering of change go very much hand in hand with the human experience. Our way of being able to deal with those sufferings is really to go about it in a more mindful way, you know, mindfully dealing with change as it occurs. But this is the thing about shamatha and vipassana approach to life, is that the all-pervasive suffering could be something that we could opt out of. And we'll unpack that as to how that could be possible, that we could actually shift our understanding of that. And really to do that is going to require us to get into causality, into understanding really what are the true causes for suffering and for contentment. And when it comes to causality, you know, Buddhism really discovered this tremendous system of natural causality, you know, of how things are really fundamentally working in such a way as to do this, this happens. Think this, this happens. Say this, this happens. And it has been honed down to such a tremendously subtle level, particularly in the Tibetan lineage, who are, you know, just hell-bent on lists, you know, for everything that seems to be an issue for us, thankfully so. But we're not going to, I mean, once again, just like with suffering, when it comes to causality, We could also spend many years going off on that. But what we're gonna zero in on is specifically looking at how causality and shamatha and vipassana are operating specifically through the Four Noble Truths. Once again, these provide a complete system as to understanding how everything is working when you really delve deep enough into it. So the first one being, anyone know? Yes. Yes. And maybe we can be, maybe it's more realistic to say that the unenlightened life is suffering. I don't, it's obviously debatable, as to if one believes that life is self-existently suffering. But we certainly can agree on that to a certain degree. And, just practicing shamatha, the meditative aspect of trying to maintain your focus on a tactile sensation, such as, at some point you're feeling the coolness of your skin, and just staying focused on that. We start to get a sense of what suffering is just because of not being able to stay there, not being able to stay focused on that sensation. There is a resistance that happens when the mind suddenly is much more interested in chocolate chip cookies, Right there is that there is the validation of that. There is a resistance to the reality, which is that I was simply focusing on this sensation that the body is feeling, and now I'm off to this, and now I'm off to that. And this becomes even more explicitly clear in the domain of feelings. I mean, obviously, that's something that we can very much, we have a direct experience of watching how, a feeling shifts and our sense of understanding how, wow, if I'm really seeing and experiencing my world based on feelings, I have a sense of suffering. I have a sense of how suffering occurs. So then the second truth. Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. And this is what Vipassana is all about. Vipassana is all about searching, investigating the causes. And that's the beauty of that, in terms of that aspect of the approach, is that once you start to really investigate, why is it that the memory of warmth and family feels positive, and why is that? Having a way of being able to determine between when that feels good and when that doesn't feel good, and why there's a shift between that, and just, and then once again, we've taken something that we thought was contentment, happiness maybe even, and suddenly now we're suffering about it, because there's been a shift. And maybe it's because we don't understand what's going on, maybe there's confusion. But the Vipassana aspect of this approach goes right into that. It's immediately serviceable. And the third truth? You're getting there. I do that too. I usually go right to that one. Is the way, right. So the third one is that it can stop. It can be stopped. An important aspect of this is that the mind isn't inherently afflicted to its core. And that ends up playing particularly a very strong role, because that means that grasping is not a fundamental condition of the mind as well. So now how does that, so now let's relate that to causality. So if you activate a cause, then you will experience its result. If you don't, you won't. So if you don't grasp, you won't suffer, for the most part. You know, like everything else, there's nothing absolute here. So there's that kind of bridge that starts to happen in knowing that it can be stopped, and getting behind, like, well, why is that? You know, because if that's the whole thing, it's like if the mind was just like, well, no, the mind is actually screwed to begin with. You know, not much hope there, or I shouldn't say not much of a way out of the situation. There's not much of to do anything with it. But since it's not, then, and that the conditions and the causes that go along with what we associate with suffering are a changing thing that we can understand, then we can get and actually formulate, which is the fourth truth, that there is a path, that there is a way. Yeah. And way back at the beginning, in the first class, we talked about how the shamatha-vipashyana approach, so says the awakened human beings that have brought this to full realization, is the direct path to eliminating all suffering, because it's based on the truth of your experience. And so this could be, you know, the approach that works for you. And you'll be the best judge of that, you know, as you start, because that's the whole thing, is that, you know, there's all these wonderful practices that are offered here, and teachings and so forth, not only here, but in other, you know, wonderful spiritual centers around the world. And, you know, fundamentally, I can only speak from my experience, which is just that. What's been my experience that's actually helped. So when this came along, you know, I got hooked with the shamatha. You know, that's how I hooked myself, was with the shamatha. I was like, this is great. All these years, these massive visualizations and analysis, and, you know, probing the depths of wisdom and all of that good stuff. And suddenly someone came along and was just like, hey man, relax and focus. And then they threw on the table Vipassana and said, well, you know, after you've practiced this a while, you know, maybe you can start to think about some of these worthwhile questions again. And if that starts to lead to some realizations, then maybe you want to keep going with that for a while. Because apparently it has worked. It has worked. You know, the big guy said it. And you can define big guy however you wish. So yeah, let's, do me a favor, Michelle, pass these out to everyone. What'd you say?
Put it in my wallet. Thank you.
So you might want to take that out of your wallet. All right. Okay, so for this, ooh, this is so shiny. So for this, let's let's think of this, or you and I will go ahead and think of this as your life. So think this is your life, this object. And then whatever free hand you have, think of your hand as your mind. So go ahead and take your life and place it in your mind. And now take a hold of your life. And then kind of, this is your life. You move through life, however you do. Changes, twists and turns of life. And you're keeping a hold of it. Your mind is keeping a hold of it, is controlling it. And it takes a little bit of effort, doesn't it, to actually keep hold of it? You can't really just, because if you let go, you might just let go of your life, right? But, so stop moving a moment, and then just looking at it as you've got a hold of your life, can you really see it? I mean, maybe you've got a vague sense of it. You can vaguely feel it. But it doesn't appear that you can really see it. So, what do you have to do to really see your life? So, open it, open your mind, and there's your life. And then you can start to move around a little bit more mindfully. And notice how you're able to still support your life without so much effort. Without grasping it. Yeah, so keep that. Because I think we're pretty much all in agreement that grasping contributes to our suffering. And our deepest dimension of this all-pervasive suffering is the grasping to I and mine. I mean, that's that grasping to I and mine with the mind and body. And, that's a good reason why we should look a little bit more at this grasping, because, at the more subtle level of grasping, that's really like our routine conceptualizing, our routine conceptualizations. The being able to distinguish between Lori and a fire hydrant. You know, I have a very functional concept, and that's helpful to be able to make that distinction. The same way as it is with, you know, art, you know, the conceptualization of art, or what we read in books and so forth. But then, when we start to get into the more gross level of grasping, is really the reification that goes on with what we're perceiving and thinking that the object is out there, independent and separate from myself. You know, that's really the one we want to dig into tonight, specifically. Because the reification, you know, really concretizing something is we are believing that the concept is real. That's the reality. And because this happens seemingly so instantaneously, is why it can be very helpful for us to really look at it in meditation, you know, where we can get into a space of awareness where honestly we can take more time with how things are happening, how reality is occurring. Because it obviously is something very useful to do in life as well. I mean, that's the primary, but for now, let's take it into meditation and just start there. So please get into whatever posture is good for you. So for this one as well, you're going to want to have some short, simple phrase that you'll call to mind. And take a few deep breaths to relax into your body. And let go of listening to your thoughts for a little while and just listen to your life right now, moment to moment. Allow your mind to be at ease with your life as it's unfolding. If your mind becomes distracted at all, gently release the distraction. Feel good about being clear again. Relax on your exhale and return to just listening with bare attention. Right now, there's no time, no worry, anger, doubt, or fear. Everything is okay. Everything is all right. Begin to draw your attention into your body by focusing on any physical sensations that you feel. Just attending to the feeling, nothing more, nothing less. And bring your attention down towards your seat in contact with the ground. Anywhere you feel your body in contact with a cushion or the floor, place your full focus in that feeling of connection. Focusing on feeling the fullness of contact, the warmth of connection. If your mind gets carried away by a particular thought, just gently release the distraction. Rejoice in being lucid again. Relax on your exhale and return to focusing on that feeling of contact with the cushion and the ground. Now expand your awareness out 360 degrees to illuminate all fields of experience, the 5 sensory fields and the mental domain. Simply observe any appearances with bare attention as an impassive witness. So in this entire matrix of your experience of body and mind, physical sensations, mental events, feelings, is there an appearance you can identify as an expression of the word I, or your experience of the word I? If you give full mindful attention to your world of experience, is there any appearance that you can perceive that is a self? Do you own any of these appearances within the body or the mind any more than you own the color red? Now place your attention solely on physical sensations of the body without grasping to any of them. Just on the tactile sensations that you feel. And if you're navigating the sensation with any visual mapping, gently release it. Rejoice, being clear again. Relax on the exhale. And return to the physical sensations. Having identified a physical sensation with bare attention, is there anything in this sensation that you can experience that suggests your ownership of it. Or is this sensation simply emerging in one of the 5 sense fields to which you have privileged access? Focus with bare attention on a physical sensation and just look at it with keen curiosity. Is there anything in the sensation you can feel that suggests that this is by nature yours, or that would somehow constitute a self? Or are these simply physical sensations arising in one of the 5 sense fields to which you have direct access? Now, when you hear the bell, recite your rehearsed phrase and shift your attention to the domain of the mind. Just repeat your rehearsed phrase and remain attentive for what arises, abides, and fades. Do you discover anything in these mental appearances that suggest that these are yours as part of their nature? Is one of these mental appearances a self? Simply observe these mental appearances with bare attention as a serene witness. You can release that focus, lengthen your breath, and gently open your eyes when you're ready. And yeah, let's take a break.